Hi everyone, it's Jan with What You Make It, and you have been so kind to send me pictures or links to some of the cards that you've made using this watercolor confetti technique. And the same time that I was in the studio working on that, I also was just playing around with some stamps and new products that I had, and I ended up creating just several different focal images. Not for any purpose, but just because I liked how these turned out. So today I'm going to take this one that I did this with the stamp, Hope You Feel Better Very Soon, and I'm going to show you the card that I ended up creating with it. And I thought I would try and give you a little idea of how I created the focal image and then show you how I made this really cool quilted look background. I have loved quilts forever. I think they just kind of invoke this warm, comfortable, safe feeling like being at your grandmother's. And so I'm always looking for ways to incorporate quilting into my paper crafting, and I think this was a great use for it. Now I'm going to show you how I created this focal image, and I started out with a piece of, this is very heavyweight cardstock, but it's not watercolor paper. I just was pulling things off my desk, and remember I told you this was a creative playtime, so I wasn't necessarily trying to, I was just seeing what I could come up with. But you can see why when I started adding the watercolor to this label that it's really kind of streaky, and that is what happens. You saw me, I totally watered down the piece with just clear water, but it still was absorbing rather than floating on top of the paper, which is what watercolor does. But if you ever are just playing around, don't give up. I feel like I got it past the point of it being so streaky, and I certainly ended up liking it as the background for this focal image. But I thought that I would share this with you a little bit because it's such a good illustration. So I'm going to do some stamping, and I'm using Strawberry Patch Sentiments from Paper Tray Ink, and I'm going to use, as you saw, I Hope You Feel Better Very Soon. I'm going to start with the text that I'm going to stamp in black, and I'm using archival ink because I'm going to probably continue to do some additional watercolor effects on here, or at least I was thinking I was going to, and I wanted to make sure that my sentiment would not run. But I was going to add these other images in here to around it, but when I'm doing that I felt like I needed to know exactly where my sentiment was going to be. So I stamped it first, and then I'm using this little grouping of strawberries and leaves. That set is a great one. There's just so many good little pieces. I'm about to use one of the other strawberries that is in the set. You really can create a lot of cool things with all of these parts. Adding some little vine in. I was just playing. I honestly, when I was doing this, I forgot that I had the camera on. I was really glad when I went back and looked that I did, because I was able to show you what I'd done. But I was just in my studio having an afternoon of creative playtime. And you can see that I was really struggling with where to put that last strawberry because I felt like my reds needed to be in threes. So I'm using acrylic paint. This is not watercolor, this is acrylic paint, and I have watered it down quite a bit. You can see it's kind of looking a little thick there. You know, I dabbed it up. I wanted it to be acrylic though, because I wanted it to be more opaque, for it to cover up the background colors. I wanted the reds to be really, truly reds. And if I were to go back and use a watercolor, then watercolor has a transparent kind of feel to it. And so depending on what you want your image to look like, you could use watercolor, you could use acrylic paint, but that's what I did. and I'm watering down enough that you can see the little spots that are in it. I'm going to do a little bit more work on that later. You can see I'm adding just a few little green dots in. If you go look at the strawberries in your refrigerator, those are actually the seeds in the strawberry, and those little green dots just gave it a little bit of a realism. And then I'm using that same green that I've mixed together, and I'm going to do the little caps on the strawberries. Early summer, kind of those lime, fresh greens. And also, you'll see with the papers I chose to go with the card, I picked a green that would work really well with those colors as well. So just coloring it in, not unlike our watercolor technique last week, but you really get a different look with it. Now I'm going to do the thing that I always almost forget to do. So I remind you, maybe you don't have trouble remembering it, but I do. And that is to be sure and add some darks in. So I'm adding some darks so that there's contrast. And I really do think that that makes an image really pop when it's got some high contrast between lights and darks, even if it's in the same color range. So just doing a little quick coloring or painting. There's some little flower images, and I added those in. And I don't think I had very much footage of this, but when you're done working with the acrylic, you can, or painting with the acrylic, grab you like a Sharpie or some sort of thin marker and outline where the black needs to be blacker. Now I'm going to add a little bit of detail with some colored pencils. These are Prismacolors, and I'm going to use Gamsol or odorless mineral spirits to do it. Just showing you, I was kind of prepping my little nibs there. If they get dirty, you can rub them on some sandpaper or run them through a little pencil sharpener. And I'm just going, I know this isn't the image, but I'm showing you what I did. When you put your Prismacolors down, then dip your nib into the Gamsol, and it kind of melts that waxy crayon and blends it together. And then I wanted to do a little highlighting. Did the same thing on the strawberries. Guys, I'm so sorry that I did not actually have footage of me doing that. But as I said, I was just spending time in my studio and occasionally turn the camera on. So I'm kind of working with what I ended up getting. But I love how it turned out. I really did. And now I'm going to go back in with a Prismacolor white to kind of soften all of the highlights a little bit. You can do this same sort of technique when you've done something like coloring with Copic markers. It's a great way to add a little depth to your imagery, and love how it turned out. Here's a close-up of the end result. And something that I did that I didn't show you is that once I had everything painted, I spritzed it with some water again and kind of ran it again. So I've kind of pulled out some country-ish patterns that reminded me of quilting. I used the Authentique, a few papers from it, and then a few October afternoon cakewalk papers. This is really, really a super simple little way to do this. I cut the squares at 1.5 inches, and then I used my Tim Holtz ruler because it's 1.5 inches, and I put it from corner to corner, and that just gave me a starting point. I began by lining up my squares on that line, and then once you have a few of those down, you will be able to add some more of the squares and just keep them in alignment that way. Just an easy way to keep those squares straight. Now, you may be wondering why I'm putting a plain square on there. It's because sometimes quilts have just a white background. And the next thing that I'm going to do with this is actually add what looks like the quilting. And I felt like it would show up a little better on a solid color. So I just put a couple of those in just so there would be a place to really illustrate what we're doing. And I'm having a hard time figuring out what I want to do for these last little ones. You need about 15 or 16 squares. I did a whole lot more because I ended up kind of loving it, and I made lots of backgrounds for this. So I just laid them all down, and then I'm taking my scissors and trimming them off. Quick and easy, and keep all of those little edge pieces if you are doing more than one, because they are the perfect extra little pieces to put into those little spots that end up not being enough room for a whole square. So there you have it. Could stop right there. Totally love it as is, but had another little idea that I wanted to try. I thought I would try and make the background look like it was actually quilted, and so I pulled out a couple of my cover plates. That one I think is tin ceiling, and the other one I believe is bloom. Not totally sure on that. They're paper tray ink impression plates. And I like using impression plates for this because it kind of presses down into it. It's a little bit different than a embossing folder, but if you don't have an impression plate, you still can do this. Open up your embossing folder, put your background face down, and don't close the lid over. Just figure out what you need to do to run it through, and it will also give you this nice pressed in. And I'm sorry that you can't really see it. I kept trying to turn it in the light for you to see, but it really looks like a hand quilted quilt. I wanted to add a little strip of red gingham across the bottom. I felt like it kind of grounded the overall design. So I trimmed off one edge of my background and used like some decorative scissors just to cut a little pinking edge that also kind of looked kind of country-ish to me. So I did that, and rather than just a straight edge. You know, I sometimes think it's those little details that just make the difference. And I'm going to use just a little bit of twine. There's so much going on this card that I felt like it didn't need a huge lot of accessories or embellishments. So I'm taking my punch, and you saw that I marked where it would be the middle of that label, but I'm cutting these little notches with a hole punch just to give the string a little place to rest. You don't have to do that. You can wrap it right around the card if you want to. But again, it's those little simple details that I think give your card a really nice finish. It's very hard to tie a bow when somebody's watching, isn't it? It is for me, but I always try and leave myself a little extra thread so that I can fiddle with it and make it work. So now I'm going to add it to my card base. I'm using a piece of craft cardstock, and there was no design motivation for why I am using this kind of fold. It was the card base that was sitting on my desk. Remember, I was in there in my studio just doing some creative play, so I'm using what I had right around me rather than stopping the creative process to go find something that wasn't on my desk. Popped this focal image up, had to fiddle a little bit more with my bow. I'm going to trim the ends off, and our card is finished. I love this quilted background. I think it would work really well for a lot of different kinds of cards. Might want to use it for a summer birthday, or really any time that I want the recipient of the card to feel really warm and loved, just like a good quilt makes you feel. I appreciate you stopping by to hang out with me in my studio today. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe. That's the best way to find out when I have a new tutorial up. Also, follow me on Instagram, Pinterest, Facebook, and Twitter. That's where I usually give a little sneak peek as to what I'm working on, and it's a place we can have some interaction over our shared projects. Thank you again. I hope you will go into your studio and take some time for creative play, and I'll be back soon.